In 2009, a paranormal researcher named Fiona Broome discovered that she shared a vivid, specific memory with thousands of strangers, that Nelson Mandela had died in prison in the 1980s. He had not. Mandela was released in 1990, became president of South Africa, and died in 2013 at the age of 95. Broome had apparently conflated Mandela's imprisonment with the 1985 death of another anti-apartheid activist, Steve Biko, whose death in custody was reported worldwide. But what stopped her, and what stops everyone who encounters this phenomenon, was not that she had been wrong. It was that so many others had been wrong in exactly the same way, producing the same specific details about the same event that never occurred. This convergence, the identical specificity of shared false memory, is the hard center of what Broome named the Mandela effect. And the explanation that best accounts for it is far more disturbing than any multiverse. Fiona Broome coined the term at DragonCon in 2009 after discovering that others at the convention shared her false memory of Mandela's death. She built a website documenting similar cases, and the concept spread through internet culture over the following years. Today, hundreds of examples circulate: the Berenstain Bears spelled Berenstein, the Monopoly Man wearing a monocle, Darth Vader saying Luke, I am your father, Pikachu having a black tip on his tail, Curious George having a tail at all, New Zealand sitting northeast of Australia rather than southeast. Each example shares the same structure, a large number of people independently recalling the same specific detail that is demonstrably incorrect. The stakes are not trivial. If thousands of people can be wrong in identical ways about cultural facts they encountered directly, what does that say about memory for events that matter, eyewitness testimony, personal trauma, the historical record? The Mandela effect is a stress test for how we construct shared reality. Before examining specific cases or explanations, the types of evidence available must be stated clearly, because the Mandela effect sits in an unusual evidential position. Tier 1 evidence, physical records, and contemporaneous documents, exists for the actual state of affairs. The Berenstain Bears books exist with that spelling. The original Star Wars footage contains the actual line. Monopoly game pieces are physically examinable. What Tier 1 evidence does not provide is a record of what people remembered at the time. There are no contemporaneous surveys of how people spelled the Bears' name in 1985, no archival record of what people thought the Monopoly Man looked like before the question was asked. Tier 2 evidence, corroborated testimony from multiple independent sources, is the primary evidence for the phenomenon itself. Multiple unrelated individuals, with no apparent coordination, report the same specific false memory. Online surveys and social media discussions document this convergence. The corroboration is genuine. These are not people copying each other's claims, because the convergence predates the internet discussion of it. People were already wrong in the same way before they knew others shared their error. Tier 3 evidence, single-source claims, includes individual reports of personal Mandela effects that others do not share. These are interesting as case studies but do not establish convergence. Not evidence. The absence of physical records confirming a memory is not evidence that reality changed. It is evidence that the memory is incorrect, which is a different claim entirely. 3 anomalies require explanation. First, convergent specificity. The official cognitive record cannot fully account for why errors converge on identical specific details across thousands of unrelated individuals, because cognitive theory predicts at least some variation in how different minds reconstruct the same experience. That the errors are so often identical, down to the same wrong letter in the same wrong name, demands an explanation beyond memory is unreliable. Second, conviction intensity. People report visceral certainty about these trivial false memories, a level of conviction typically associated with emotionally significant autobiographical events, and standard models of false memory do not predict this intensity mismatch. Third, non-schema convergence. While many shared false memories are schema consistent, meaning they fit expectations, some involve details where the schema explanation is less obvious, and cognitive theory must account for convergence in these cases as well. A critical question before proceeding: do multiple independent tiers converge to support any single explanation? Tier 1 evidence confirms what is actually true. Tier 2 evidence confirms that people share the same false memories. These two tiers converge to establish that the phenomenon exists, that shared specific false memories are real. They do not, by themselves, distinguish between cognitive and non-cognitive explanations for why the errors converge. From Tier 1 and corroborated Tier 2 evidence, several things can be stated with confidence. The evidence establishes that large numbers of people independently report identical specific false memories about cultural artifacts and events. It establishes that the actual state of these artifacts and events is verifiably different from what is remembered. It establishes that the convergence is real, that people are not simply agreeing with each other after the fact. The shared errors predate public discussion of them. The evidence does not establish that reality has shifted or that parallel timelines have merged. It does not establish that the convergence is caused by anything beyond known cognitive mechanisms. And it does not establish how many people share each specific false memory. The numbers circulating online are not from controlled surveys. The Mandela effect as a named phenomenon begins in 2009, but the underlying cognitive mechanisms it reveals have been studied for over a century. In 1932, psychologist Frederick Bartlett demonstrated that memory is reconstructive, not reproductive. People do not retrieve recordings, they rebuild memories from fragments, filling gaps with expectations and cultural knowledge. In 1974, Elizabeth Loftus and John Palmer showed that the language used to ask about a memory could alter the memory itself. Participants asked how fast cars were going when they'd smashed estimated higher speeds than those asked about cars that hit, and some later remembered broken glass that was never there. By 1995, Loftus had demonstrated that entirely false memories of being lost in a shopping mall as a child could be implanted in roughly 25% of participants through suggestion. These studies established that memory is malleable, that it can be altered by subsequent information, and that false memories can feel indistinguishable from true ones. What they did not directly address was convergence, whether different individuals, exposed to the same original information, would independently produce the same specific errors. The Internet provided the laboratory. As shared cultural artifacts were discussed online, people began noticing shared incorrect memories. Fiona Broom's 2009 observation was the spark, but the fuel was already present: decades of mass media creating shared cultural experiences, and a communications infrastructure that allowed people to compare notes. The most widely cited examples follow a consistent pattern. The Berenstain Bears, a children's book series created by Stan and Jan Berenstain, is consistently remembered as the Berenstain, with an E, by a large number of people. The Monopoly mascot, Rich Uncle Pennybags, is remembered as wearing a monocle he never has. Darth Vader's line in The Empire Strikes Back, "No, I am your father," is remembered as "Luke, I am your father." Pikachu is remembered as having a black tip on his tail, he does not. New Zealand is remembered as northeast of Australia rather than southeast. Each of these examples has been verified against the original artifacts. And in each case, large numbers of people experience genuine disorientation upon encountering the physical evidence. The explanation supported by the strongest evidence is cognitive. These are shared false memories produced by well-understood mechanisms of memory reconstruction, schema-driven error, social reinforcement, and source monitoring failure. Schema theory accounts for many cases. A schema is a cognitive framework, a set of expectations about how things typically are. The suffix -stein is vastly more common in English than Stein, so the brain's orthographic autocorrect produces Berenstein when recalling a name that sounds like both. Monocles are associated in popular culture with wealthy men in formal dress. The Monopoly man is a wealthy man in formal dress, so the schema supplies the monocle. The actual Star Wars line begins with "No," which is not how people quote things in conversation. Luke, "I am your father," provides the context that makes the line intelligible. In each case, the error is not random. It is driven by cognitive structures that we all share, which is precisely why the errors converge. Social reinforcement strengthens these errors once they occur. When one person says Berenstein, others who share the error recognize it and feel validated. Internet communities amplify this effect dramatically. A memory that might have remained private and uncertain becomes confirmed by apparent consensus. Neuroscience adds a critical piece. fMRI studies by researchers including Daniela Schiller and Elizabeth Phelps have shown that true and false memories activate overlapping neural circuits. The hippocampus, which is central to memory retrieval, does not distinguish between accurate and constructed recall at the level of subjective experience. This is why false memories feel real, because neurologically, they are real. They are real patterns of neural activation. They are just not records of actual events. The cognitive explanation accounts for convergence, for conviction, and for most of the specific examples. Where it is less satisfying is in explaining the intensity of the conviction, why people feel so certain about such trivial details, and in accounting for every single case, some of which are harder to map onto obvious schemas. And here is where you must evaluate the weight of evidence for yourself, because the choice between explanations is not a choice between equally supported accounts. The simplest explanation remains the cognitive one. Shared errors arise from shared cognitive architecture processing shared cultural input. This accounts for the baseline facts and most documented anomalies with the fewest assumptions. It requires no new physics, no unobservable entities, and no mechanisms beyond those already demonstrated in controlled experiments. Its weakness is that it cannot predict which specific errors will become widespread, and it cannot easily account for cases where no obvious schema drives convergence. What would strengthen it? Computational models that successfully predict which cultural artifacts will produce shared false memories based on their properties. What would falsify it? A well-documented case where the physical record itself is demonstrably inconsistent, where some copies of a book say a Berenstein and others say Berenstein with no publishing explanation. No such case has been documented. The second explanation is the reality shift or simulation hypothesis, that our reality is a construct, a simulation, or one of many parallel timelines, and that these shared memories are residues from a previous version of reality or a neighboring timeline. This explanation accounts for convergence trivially. If reality changed, everyone who experienced the prior version would remember it. It accounts for conviction. People are certain because their memories are accurate for the reality they experienced. And it has a certain aesthetic appeal. It would mean we are not cognitively unreliable, but ontologically displaced. But this explanation fails on evidential grounds. It has no Tier 1 or Tier 2 evidence supporting it. It makes no testable predictions beyond the phenomenon it is designed to explain. It requires accepting physics that has no empirical support, either that parallel universes can merge in ways that affect memory but not physical records, or that a simulation can be edited in ways that leave residual memories. It trades a cognitive puzzle for an ontological one, and the ontological puzzle is larger. By the prior probability rule, a more complex explanation requires correspondingly stronger evidence, and the evidence for reality shifts is absent. A third explanation deserves mention: confabulation and cultural transmission. This is a variant of the cognitive explanation that emphasizes not just individual memory error but the role of media and culture in creating and reinforcing false memories. When millions of people misquote Star Wars as "Luke, I am your father," part of the reason is that the misquotation appears in other films, television shows, and casual conversation. The cultural environment itself becomes a source of the false memory, independent of any individual's original experience. This is the same mechanism by which people remember news footage that never existed, like the supposed video of the first plane hitting the World Trade Center on September 11th, which was not broadcast live and was not seen by most people until hours later, yet many recall seeing it in real time. This explanation strengthens the cognitive account by adding a cultural layer. It still requires no new physics. 3 questions remain open. First, can cognitive science predict which cultural artifacts will produce the Mandela effect and which will not? The current explanation accounts for existing cases after the fact, but a truly robust theory should be able to predict new ones. This evidence does not currently exist because the relevant computational models have not been built. They could be. Second, what is the exact mechanism by which conviction attaches to false memory? Neuroscience shows that true and false memories activate similar circuits, but the intensity of conviction in Mandela effect cases, the visceral emotional certainty, exceeds what laboratory studies of false memory typically produce. Understanding this would require studies specifically designed to compare conviction levels in Mandela effect cases with conviction in implanted false memories and inaccurate memories. Such studies have not been conducted at scale. Third, is there any case where the physical record itself is genuinely inconsistent, where a product, document, or artifact exists in 2 contradictory forms with no explanation? If such a case were documented with Tier 1 evidence, it would falsify the cognitive explanation and require a new one. No such case has been documented. The absence is not permanent, such evidence could emerge. But until it does, the cognitive explanation remains the only one supported by evidence of any tier. The Mandela effect is real. People share identical specific false memories. The most disturbing thing about it is not that reality might be a simulation. It is that your mind is one. What you remember, what you feel certain about, what constitutes your sense of having lived through something, is a reconstruction built from fragments, expectations, and cultural input. The simulation is running in your skull. And it has been this whole time.